Right, in the absence of Mr. Heath and Mr. Robinson, I've had to make this thing up myself. What a heap of junk. But I made a prototype first to see if it would work. And yes, it did seem to work quite well. A little experiment here to test whether these conrods and pistons are in actual fact all the same weight. Because when I stripped it down, some of the original grindings were quite heavy. This one here I've adjusted, but that one was very heavy, like this, and other ones had practically no weight reduction on at all. And I wondered whether they actually matched up. Well, I found that if I put that on there, zeroing the scale and weighing, you can find the sweet spot where you feel the lightest. You end up, that should be, that's it, 1004. It's settled now. I could weigh the piston combined. There's absolutely no point, I could not see any point at all in taking the piston off, weighing the rings separate, weighing the pin separate, and then adding them all back together, because it actually works out exactly the same way. That is just not necessary. Plus they're pressed. If they were floating pins, I might have done it, but because they're press fit, I didn't want to disturb it and incur damage in my pistons. But also you can get this to balance, which I cannot, like that. You get 1412. Here's darn it. Oop. Don't want to do that. So what you could do is take the big end weight when that was over there. I weighed the big end with the piston. Like so. With it like that, you could take the big end weight away from the overall weight when you weigh the piston like that, and you'll end up with the total piston and small end weight. And if that is the same as when you weigh it like that, using the pivot, you know you're on the money. Because otherwise, if there's some sort of error with you got a different weight for this and a different weight for that and a different weight when it's up together, and you take one away from the other, when that's all different, you know you're not getting an accurate reading. But anyway, so I've now been through all of these about 10 times, and I found I had to tweak a little bit more off these big ends, because they were already highly ground off, but they actually required a little bit more. So why this particular casting and this particular casting is heavier than, I don't know, this particular casting, this post doesn't look as big, I don't know, but they are. And some of these pistons, no, I think this one, yeah, up in there, I've had to take a little bit off of the small end to make the small ends combination weight all weigh the same. So now that's done, I'm happy with the results, because I'm actually getting 104 for all the pistons resting on their thrust side. I did it all with the same side, but that was with the conrod dead level, using a spirit level, and resting on this spindle, and then the piston resting on there, weighing the pistons, and all of the big ends, all of these here, with that up there, that block there, and the piston on there, big end on there, all were coming out at 409 last night, even though I had 410 just a second ago. But it's all ever so very careful. You have to just position this just so, make sure it's dead in line and everything else, and let it settle, and it goes to 409. So I've got them all the same up there, and when you take one from the other, total weights are all 413. So as far as I'm concerned, they're bang on within 1 gram tolerance. I've got another scales which is tenths of a gram, but it's not seeming to be working right. So I've had to stick with this one, which has been consistent. So now I've got to make up bob weights. Originally, I had this old motorbike piston, and I weighed that individually. Then I balanced that end individually on the scales, and because that won't go through that pinhole, this is supposed to be off the same bike actually as that pin, but it's I think it's a later model, but it's a different subject. So I use this piece of tube instead. So I weighed that individually. It hasn't got any rings on it, but then so what? And added that lot up. Then I put that in there, put that through there, and then I weighed it on my little jig like that on the scales, something like that, but with that level, and that weighed 590 grams, I think it was. And when I weighed that, and then weighed, oh, I don't know, that, something like that, with that level, that weight, wherever it starts from there out, I added them all up, and lo and behold, it was 590 grams, exactly the same. So I didn't believe it, because I weighed a piston on there like that. All right, I weighed a piston like that, pivoting on there, so you're weighing it all in one piece. And then I did it, I used that, and I had the piston up on something like that, pivoting on there, but I had to make sure these were spinning nice and free. And by just tapping the bench to settle this and checking that this was in the center there, I could get 14, 13 grams. This whole lot weighed 14, 13, and when you put that on there and weighed it, it weighed 14, 13. So I knew that that half, oopsie, get the camera, and that half added together weighed 14, 13. So I wasn't very far out. But then I didn't believe, because I read somewhere that you can't weigh a piston on a rod end, it'll be different. So I took that one off and weighed all the components individually. I didn't take the rings off the piston, but I weighed the piston, the pin, and the small end, added it all up, and it was 14, 13. So it didn't make any difference whatsoever. Right. Now, I had to get that piston off there, and they're press fit, and I don't have a thingamajig. So that is a lump of metal and shaped it up so that it fits in to that face. There, that fits in there. Then that locates in there. Then that is a length of threaded rod, goes through there. So now the pen can go inside of that tube. And then I got this piece of pipe with a little turned up spigot and another end. That turned up spigot fits in the end of the piston, in the end of the gudgeon pin there. And that's smaller diameter, so it'll pass through. And I'm not going to do this because I don't need to. I'm not going to do it anymore. So this lot can go and throw it in the bin. Right. Then, ugh. So I put this metal shim. So I didn't want to put that small end up against the aluminium. So I put that polished surface up against there. So that presses against the steel, but bears over a bigger area against there. And that squeezes up to there. Now, on the other piston, there was enough room to put that cardboard shim down in there as well, but it don't fit in this one. But I would cut a piece of paper and put it in there, so it just squeeze up and take up the load. But then all you do then is to tighten that up. But anyway, that worked. Then I actually put that in my lathe in back drive, so that was being held with a spanner on the chuck. Chuck was turning that around, and it just pushed it through and popped it out lovely. And then I put the pin back in the rod in the conventional way, heated that up with a blow lamp, and you could see a bit of blue colour coming up the rod, and just pressed it in. Yeah, you can see on that one, look, that's how far the heat travelled up the rod. This bit hasn't been touched. It just burnt the oil off, and it was, when it wasn't red, it was, well, it was just hot. It's marginally, you could see the coloration coming up the rod. So I pushed it back in with a jig with a stop, just made it out of wood, so that would go through to there with something to stop it there. Put that in, marked it. That's the front. Front is up there. Followed it round, put a mark on that rod. That's the chamfer. That's number 1. Anyway, that's not a 1, but that is number 1. And that's right, he says. But that's how it came off, and that's right. So there, job done. Design error. Right, that's better. Spinning now. If that's telling the truth, I don't need garbage. You see that in your own eyes. Oh my god, it's more of a bang, isn't it? Bad. No, they got this end moving more. You can see it moving like that. Oh my goodness, flipping out. Okay, after quite a bit of fiddling around and putting some weight on, I finally got to put weight on this end, and on the other end it's got to be about there, and there is a little bit, I think I've put a little bit off centre. Oh yeah, there. I've just got to compensate by moving that slightly this way to compensate for that. But So I don't want 15 different bits of places where it's all weight. I just want one area. So this end is lighter on the bob weight, and this end is heavier on the bob weight, because I've got a counterbalance there and vice versa at the other end. And that's how it was running in my car. Ridiculous. Now I've been through, because I didn't get any sense out of it earlier, so I've checked that, I've checked that, I've checked that, and I've checked that. They're all within 1/10 of a gram for bob weights, compared to 2 rod ends and a piston assembly and a small end. And also I've got that half and that half within 1/10 of a gram, and that half and that half, and so forth, because they were a couple of them, like you see, look, I measured it as 2.4 out, but I've made them more accurate and redone it, but that wasn't the problem. So I just had to persevere and carry on. This actually doesn't work too bad with 2 dial gauges, and you can feel the vibration. And what I've done, this here really should have come out further, so it should have been about equal. But so I've wedged some rubber in that side, solid piece of rubber, and under here I've got 3 bits of rubber stuck together, which is really quite stiff. But there's 3, 1 there, 2 there, and if I just push on here like this with my finger, you know, there, look, you can see it will move. What it does, I'll spin it up. I think it should be pretty good now. That is one crazy RPM. It's about 1,000 RPM actually. I had a red counter in one of them earlier, but as you can see, got very little to nothing on those dial gauges. It does that slightly, but when you touch it, you can't feel that. And I've played and played, and I can't really get rid of that a little bit. So now that's like that. Right, I've took the weights off, the weight off the back end and the weight off this end, and statically balancing, you can see that it's not very good. If I wind this up to anywhere near it, yeah, I've gone down on keeping it faster. That's what it was like in the car. The back end is really jigging around. Front end's gone steady, and that's the battery's going flat. There's about 500 RPM now. I know that, definitely. But that's how far out there was. Yeah, you can feel that. That would be, it's not very good. Alright, I'll put the weights back on. Now one more go. Just to scare myself a little bit. Now that is stupid RPM. Alright? Stupid. It's fucking making. Absolutely making. Let it slow down. There's a tiny little bit there. Tiny bit. That is nothing, you can already feel it. A little bit of a tremble. It's gone now. Well, I've found that the more imbalance it is, the longer it takes to stop. Yeah, I did have a drive that drove off a belt in the middle, but it broke. So I had to resort to this new high-tech device. With an electric drill with a socket. It works. It does the job. Yeah. What a lash up. Now I've turned up some steel plugs and put in these holes. Unfortunately, that one I thought I had it short enough, but it didn't go all the way in. So it's sticking out a little bit. But wow, who's going to see that? And that one is a lot better. And I made them a 1 thou interference fit, so I had to hammer them in. So I had absolutely fat chance of getting them out unless I drilled them, tapped it, and put a puller on there so I could pull the plug out and then skim the back off a bit. But then that would be ruined, and then I'd have to throw it away and make another one. So I didn't bother. So what I've done is I put it in, I've welded it round, ground it up, cleaned it up, polished that up, and that's real smooth. And that one's the same. And I've actually just tried it. So I've made this side heavier now, when it used to be lighter. And now I've made it heavier. So I've had to compensate there. Whereas previously there was nothing there. And I was sticking all the weight on there. So I deliberately made that a little bit heavier. It's like 10 grams a plug heavier. And then I've put a bit of clay on here to compensate, so I can fine tune and I can find the best position. I may have to go slightly this way or slightly that way, and then the corresponding 180 degrees opposite is where I should drill my balancing hole, which should be the same weight as that. And this end is still the same. It's got an enormous chunk on it that weighs, can't remember, 50 grams. Can't remember how heavy that is. But it's worked out a bit of a combination of static balancing it, and then so you can sort of, within reason, say, oh, that's too heavy, or that's too heavy, or whatever, and add a little bit on, and then spin it up and see what it's like. So you can kind of tinker around with it. The little aluminium, they're aluminium wheels, those are, and they've just put a bit of a mark. That's nothing. It's not doing anything. It's just leaving a little bit of aluminium on the surface, and that's the same there to buff it off when I've finished. But it's dead free, but it's not dead free enough. It's still a little bit sticky. You know, it'll. Right, I've made a adjustment. Drilled that hole, spun it, and it was dreadful. So I've sliced some off there and got it back to something like it. I know that's only a tiny amount. Right, and I'll put the jig back on. Okay, just swapped it over. This is a different piece. There's the hole. Smack dab where I put it. That was the first one. And that's the next one. I'll drill that hole out. I'm only going about 10 mil. I'm working up to it slowly. I think it's got to be a bit, I've written it down somewhere, how deep it's got to be, but I'm just going to sneak it down a little bit at a time. As you can see, I do everything high tech. This drops in, touches, and there you go, about 10 mil. It's near enough. It's just a guide so I don't go mad. Right, now the compressor's shut up. I'll bored that hole out a little bit bigger, but I haven't gone all the way. I'm just going to try it just to see how I'm going. So I don't want to go too crazy, and take it from there. That's all the stuff I'm cutting off from there. So I shall slice off bits and spin it up and sneak that away at the same time as drilling that out, and then fine tweak it as I go. Right, my last attempt, and I've got a tiny bit there, but you can't feel it. It's dead smooth up here. It really is nothing. And now it's gone. Just a little shift. Compared to what it was like before, it did this and worse. So, you know, that is very, very little. I'm messing around with 0.1, 0.2 of a gram. Try and fiddle with this. I can put on 0.1 or 0.2 of a gram and I can make it worse. This is an average. You know, it's crazy. And I chopped one end up by blocking it, and then I did one end and I did the other end separately. But that is absolutely nothing. In the end, this is what I did. I divided it up into 3, and I put 1 there, and then I went 120 and I wrote number 2, and I went 120, I wrote number 3, and I spun that with about 20 grams on there, and estimated the wobble. And there were 3 places. There was a fast, a middle and a slow speed, and I wrote them down. And then I put the same weight on there, on number 2. Did it again. And I did the same weight on there, number 3. Did it again. Then, because that's now crude, I went between 3 and 1. Or you could go 1 to 2. You could put 4, 5 and 6. And then spun it up and measured it again, because I'm splitting the segments all the time. And then I went 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and I kept going around and around and around. Then it ended up that it was basically showing a pretty good place, which was about here, between I'll say 6. It was actually 6 and 12. So I split that in half, and then I split that in half, and then I split those 2 bits in half, and then I went in between each one of those, and that ended up being about here somewhere was the best place. Then the weight, I then wrote down the 20 grams, and I wrote down 18.8 grams or whatever, and I started taking off 0.2 of a gram, a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. I got down to 15 grams here. Anyway, so opposite that is this area. I've had to hollow that out a little bit, which isn't too bad, but you can just about make out how much I've hollowed out. Yeah, so it's not too bad. So basically, that's as close as I'm getting. I've already done a little bit here and a little bit there. And I must have overdone it with that hole, but that has worked. And at the other end, I have already plugged these holes. I did the same method, and originally I started off there on the top of that little bump, and then it shifted slightly, and it ended up being a little bit in that radius, which is, I didn't take all of that out, I've just sort of smoothed it a bit. So basically that's it. Now I just got to clean the crank again.